I'm Sophia Reynolds, 29, standing in the marble foyer of my uncle's penthouse for our quarterly family business meeting. My simple black dress from Target feels like a scarlet letter among my relatives draped in Chanel and Hermes. They whisper behind their champagne flutes about my unfortunate circumstances while flashing their diamond tennis bracelets and designer watches. For 8 years, they've treated me like the family charity case, completely unaware that I've been quietly building an empire that would make their trust funds look like pocket change. Today, everything changes. My family, the Reynolds, built their fortune in tech and real estate starting in the 1980s when my grandfather Thomas created a software company that revolutionized inventory management. By the 1990s, Reynolds Industries was a household name, and the family had diversified into luxury real estate, venture capital, and private equity. My grandfather believed in hard work and strategic thinking, values he passed down to my father Michael, his youngest son. Unlike his brothers who inherited positions in the family company, Dad chose to become a high school mathematics teacher. Much to the family's horror, he met my mother Sarah, a social worker, at a community center where they both volunteered. Their love story scandalized the status-obsessed Reynolds family. Here was the heir to millions choosing to live on a teacher's salary with a woman who dedicated her life to helping troubled youth. My parents raised me in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, driving used cars and shopping at discount stores while my cousins enjoyed private jets and Swiss boarding schools. They taught me that money was a responsibility, not an entitlement, and that true success came from making a positive impact on the world around you. When I turned 16, my cousins received luxury cars as birthday gifts. Madison got a pink BMW convertible, Connor received a lifted Range Rover, and Ashton was given a vintage Porsche that cost more than most people's houses. I got a 10-year-old Honda Civic that my parents had saved for months to buy. While my cousins laughed about my economy car, I was grateful to have reliable transportation and secretly proud that my parents had earned every penny through honest work. Everything changed during my senior year of high school. My parents were driving home from a weekend retreat for teachers when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head-on. They died instantly, and at 17, I found myself completely alone except for the family that had always considered me an embarrassment. My Uncle Richard, the current CEO of Reynolds Industries, reluctantly took me in. His wife Patricia made it clear from day one that I was a burden they were shouldering out of obligation. They provided for my basic needs but made sure I understood my place in their household. I had a small room in their massive estate, 8 meals with the household staff rather than the family, and was expected to be grateful for their generosity. The other Reynolds children, my cousins Madison, Connor, Ashton, and Gabrielle, had been raised to believe that wealth was their birthright. They attended exclusive private schools, vacationed in the Hamptons and Aspen, and never questioned whether they deserved their privileged lifestyle. To them, I was living proof of what happened when you chose to live beneath your means. During my 3 years living with Uncle Richard before college, I was like a ghost in their mansion. I'd overhear family business discussions at dinner parties, learn about investment strategies from conversations I wasn't supposed to be listening to, and absorb financial wisdom that would later prove invaluable. Uncle Richard often discussed deals in front of me as if I were invisible, never imagining that his poor niece was mentally cataloging every detail. My grandfather had left a modest inheritance for each grandchild to be distributed when we turned 21, while my cousins used theirs for luxury vacations, designer wardrobes, and down payments on expensive condos in trendy neighborhoods. I followed a different path. I enrolled in a state university on academic scholarships, lived in the smallest, cheapest dorm room available, and worked 3 part-time jobs to cover my expenses. Every penny of my inheritance went into my first real estate investment, a small duplex in an overlooked neighborhood that showed signs of future development. I moved into one unit and rented out the other, using the rental income to pay my mortgage while property values slowly climbed. My family assumed I was struggling financially when in reality, I was implementing a carefully planned wealth-building strategy. The quarterly family meetings began as grandfather Thomas's way of keeping the next generation informed about family business and ensuring we understood our responsibilities as Reynolds heirs. After his death, Uncle Richard transformed these gatherings into showcases of individual achievement and status competition. Each meeting became an opportunity for family members to display their latest acquisitions and career successes. I would arrive in my aging Honda, wearing clothes from department store sales, and quietly endure their subtle mockery. They'd share updates about luxury purchases, exotic vacations, and impressive career milestones while I offered vague responses about my small business ventures and property management work. What they didn't know was that by age 25, I owned 7 rental properties and had established my own property development company under a different name. Last month, I learned something that changed everything. Uncle Richard had been negotiating the sale of grandfather's original estate, a historic 50-acre property that housed the family cemetery and the original workshop where grandfather had started his company. He planned to sell it to a commercial developer who would turn it into a shopping complex, erasing the last physical connection to our family's humble beginnings. The irony was perfect. Using a shell company and an intermediary, I had quietly outbid every other offer and purchased the property for $15 million, nearly depleting my liquid assets but securing a piece of family history that Uncle Richard was willing to sacrifice for profit. The deal would close next week, just 3 days before our quarterly meeting where Richard planned to announce the sale to the family. I pulled into Uncle Richard's circular driveway on Friday evening, my now 12-year-old Honda, looking absurdly out of place among the collection of luxury vehicles. Madison's new Tesla Model S sat next to Connor's Maserati, while Ashton's Lamborghini gleamed under the imported Italian lighting fixtures. Gabrielle had recently upgraded to a Bentley SUV that probably cost more than most people's houses. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the most exclusive building in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of downtown, while the interior featured museum-quality art, imported marble, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a European palace. Everything was designed to impress visitors and remind family members of their elevated status. Patricia greeted me at the elevator with her usual mixture of obligation and disdain. "Sophia, dear, you look tired. Are you eating enough? I always worry about people in your situation maintaining proper nutrition." Her concern was performative, designed to highlight my supposed poverty while positioning herself as the generous benefactor. I smiled politely and thanked her for her concern, not mentioning that I just returned from a property inspection of my latest acquisition, a small apartment building in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Let her believe I was struggling while I quietly expanded my real estate empire. The penthouse was already filled with family members when I entered the main living area. Uncle Richard held court near the bar, regaling everyone with stories about his latest business triumph. Completely revolutionized their supply chain, he boasted, swirling his $300 bottle of whiskey. Increased efficiency by 40% in the first quarter alone. My cousin Madison, now 26 and working in public relations for a firm that primarily serviced Reynolds Industries clients, was showing off her engagement ring to anyone who would look. "It's 3 carats, she announced proudly. David proposed at the French Laundry last weekend. The whole thing was absolutely magical." Connor, who had parlayed his trust fund into a series of failed startups that Uncle Richard quietly funded, was describing his latest venture. "We're disrupting the luxury concierge space," he explained to anyone within earshot. "Think Uber, but for millionaires who need someone to handle their lifestyle management." The conversation inevitably turned to real estate, the family's primary source of wealth. They discussed their various properties with the casual arrogance of people who had never worried about mortgage payments or property taxes. Summer homes in the Hamptons, ski chalets in Aspen, and investment properties in emerging markets that they managed through expensive property management companies. Speaking of real estate, Uncle Richard announced, capturing everyone's attention, "I've got some exciting news to share during tomorrow's meeting. We're about to close a major deal that will significantly boost our quarterly profits." I sipped my water and maintained my neutral expression, knowing exactly which deal he was referring to. The sale of grandfather's estate had been his pet project for months, and he'd already spent the anticipated profits on a new yacht and an additional vacation home in Monaco. During dinner, the conversation turned to my circumstances with the subtle cruelty I'd come to expect. Patricia asked about my living situation with false concern. "Are you still in that tiny apartment downtown? I worry about the safety of that neighborhood, especially for a young woman living alone." "It suits my needs perfectly," I replied, not mentioning that I'd recently purchased the entire building and was implementing security upgrades throughout the property. Ashton, always the most direct in his condescension, smirked across the table. "Maybe it's time to consider moving back home, Sophia. I'm sure Uncle Richard could find you a position at the company, something entry-level, but with room for growth if you applied yourself." The suggestion that I needed their charity employment while I was secretly building a business empire that rivaled their trust funds was almost amusing. "I'm quite satisfied with my current work," I said calmly. Connor jumped in with his usual lack of tact. "What exactly do you do again? Property management? That sounds like being a landlord for slums." "I help people find quality housing," I replied, which was technically accurate. My properties were known for being well-maintained and fairly priced, unlike the luxury developments my family preferred. After dinner, I excused myself and walked out to the private terrace that overlooked the city. From this height, I could see several of my properties scattered across the urban landscape: the office building where I'd established my development company, the apartment complex where I'd implemented green energy solutions that reduced tenant costs, the historic building I'd purchased and converted into affordable housing for teachers and social workers, people like my parents who deserved safe, comfortable homes despite their modest incomes, standing there in the cool evening air. I thought about my parents and how proud they would be of what I'd accomplished, not because of the money, but because I'd used wealth as a tool for positive impact rather than personal aggrandizement. Tomorrow, my family would finally understand who I really was. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the day that would change everything. I dressed carefully in a navy blue blazer and matching slacks, professional but not ostentatious. The quarterly meeting would begin at a.m. in Uncle Richard's private conference room, where 3 generations of Reynolds had made decisions that shaped our family's financial future. The conference room was Uncle Richard's pride and joy, featuring a massive mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most cars. The walls displayed portraits of family patriarchs alongside awards and recognition from various business organizations. At the head of the table, Uncle Richard's chair was positioned slightly higher than the others, a subtle but clear indication of his authority. As family members gathered, I noticed how they naturally segregated themselves by perceived status. Uncle Richard sat at the head, flanked by his wife Patricia and his oldest son Connor, who was being groomed to eventually take over the family business. Madison and her fiancé sat to Richard's right, while Ashton and Gabrielle occupied the seats that marked them as important but not central to family power. I took my usual seat near the far end of the table, in the section reserved for those with limited input on family decisions. The placement wasn't accidental. It was a visual reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. Uncle Richard began with his standard opening about family legacy and continued success. "The Reynolds name has become synonymous with excellence and innovation," he proclaimed. gesturing toward the portraits of our ancestors. Each generation has built upon the foundation laid by those who came before, creating opportunities and wealth that benefit us all. He clicked through a presentation showing the family's various business interests, highlighting successful investments and profitable ventures. Graphs and charts displayed impressive growth figures and projected returns that would maintain the family's lifestyle for generations to come. This brings me to some exciting news, Uncle Richard continued, advancing to a slide showing aerial photographs of grandfather's estate. After months of negotiation, I'm pleased to announce that we've found a buyer for the old homestead property. The room buzzed with interest as he detailed the sale price and how the proceeds would be distributed among family members. The buyer is a commercial development company that plans to build a premium shopping complex on the site. The project will generate significant long-term value for the local economy while providing us with immediate liquidity that can be reinvested in more profitable ventures. I watched family members nod approvingly as Richard explained how the sale would boost everyone's quarterly distributions. The property that held our family's history was being reduced to a line item on a financial statement, and no one seemed troubled by this reduction of our heritage to mere dollars and cents. Before we finalize anything, I said, speaking for the first time during the meeting, I'd like to understand the details of the sale. Who exactly is the buyer, and what assurances do we have that they'll preserve any historical elements of the property? Uncle Richard's expression showed mild irritation at being interrupted. The buyer's identity is confidential per the terms of the negotiation, but I can assure you they're a reputable development company. As for historical preservation, that's not really a concern. The buildings are outdated and would need significant renovation to meet modern standards anyway. But that's where grandfather started the company, I persisted. Surely that has value beyond what it might generate in rent or sales revenue. Patricia made a clicking sound of disapproval. Sophia dear, I understand your sentimental attachment, but we can't let emotions drive business decisions. Thomas would have wanted us to maximize the value of his legacy, not cling to old buildings that require expensive maintenance. Connor leaned forward with a condescending smile. Maybe this is hard to understand when you're not used to dealing with large financial decisions, but sometimes you have to think strategically rather than emotionally. The casual dismissal of my input because of my perceived financial status was exactly what I'd come to expect. They couldn't imagine that someone driving an old Honda and wearing department store clothes might have valid insights about real estate transactions. Actually, I said, reaching into my briefcase, I have some experience with strategic real estate decisions. I placed a folder on the table and opened it to reveal the signed purchase agreement for grandfather's estate. The buyer you've been negotiating with? That was me. The silence that followed was absolute. Uncle Richard's face went through several color changes as he processed what I'd just revealed. Patricia's champagne flute trembled in her hand, while my cousin stared at the document as if it might spontaneously combust. That's impossible, Connor finally stammered. The purchase price was $15 million. You don't have that kind of money, I smiled calmly. You're right that it represents a significant investment. Fortunately, I've been building a real estate portfolio for the past 8 years that provided the necessary capital. Uncle Richard snatched the purchase agreement from the table, scrutinizing every page as if looking for evidence of fraud. This can't be legitimate. Where would you possibly get $15 million? From the same place you got your wealth, I replied evenly. Strategic real estate investments, careful financial planning, and patient growth over time. I reached into my briefcase again and began distributing copies of my complete financial portfolio. Property deeds, business registration documents, tax returns, and bank statements that told the story of my journey from orphan teenager to successful real estate developer. Madison gasped audibly as she flipped through pages detailing my property holdings. You own the Meridian Apartments? I looked at a unit there last year, but the waiting list was months long. I own 17 properties throughout the city, I confirmed. Residential complexes, commercial buildings, and mixed-use developments. My company, Harbor Point Development, has been consistently rated among the top property management firms for tenant satisfaction and community impact. Ashton was staring at a document showing my business registration. Harbor Point Development. I've heard of that company. They built that affordable housing complex near the university. The one that won the Sustainable Development Award, I nodded. We believe quality housing should be accessible to working families, not just luxury buyers. It's possible to be profitable while maintaining ethical standards. The transformation in the room was immediate and uncomfortable to watch. The same people who had treated me like a charity case for 8 years were suddenly scrambling to recalibrate their understanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished. Uncle Richard cleared his throat, clearly struggling to process this new information. Even if this is all accurate, it doesn't change the legal aspects of the estate sale. The property belongs to the family trust, and you can't simply override our collective decision. Actually, I said, pulling out one more document. The trust agreement allows individual family members to purchase trust assets at fair market value with majority approval. Since I'm offering the same price you negotiated with the commercial developer, and since my plan preserves the historical significance rather than destroying it, I believe I have grounds to exercise that option. Patricia's voice was strained when she finally spoke. But why didn't you tell us? All these years, we thought you were struggling. We tried to help. Your help usually came with suggestions that I accept a lower station in life, I replied. You never asked about my goals or my work. You simply assumed that anyone driving an old car and wearing modest clothes must be failing financially. Connor was still processing the financial statements. This says your net worth is over $30 million. That's more than most of us have. It's what happens when you focus on building wealth rather than displaying it, I said. While you were buying luxury cars and designer clothes, I was acquiring properties and growing a business. Different priorities, different outcomes. The meeting devolved into chaos as family members tried to process this revelation. Some expressed genuine remorse for their previous treatment of me, while others seemed primarily interested in whether my newfound wealth might benefit them somehow. Uncle Richard attempted to regain control of the situation. This is all very surprising, but we still need to think about what's best for the family as a whole. Your emotional attachment to the old property might cloud your judgment about its highest and best use. My attachment isn't emotional, I replied firmly. It's strategic. The property has historical value that makes it eligible for tax credits and grants that a commercial development couldn't access. I'm planning to restore the buildings and create a business incubator for technology startups, honoring grandfather's entrepreneurial spirit while generating sustainable income. I stood and began gathering my documents. The purchase agreement has already been signed and the funds transferred. The property is mine, regardless of whether you approve of my decision. I'm sharing this information with you out of respect for family transparency, not because I need your permission. As I prepared to leave, Madison spoke up hesitantly. Sophia, I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions about your life without ever really trying to understand what you were building. I paused at the door and looked back at my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. The assumptions you made about me say more about your values than mine. I hope this experience helps you understand that wealth isn't always visible, and success can't always be measured by the price of someone's handbag or car. The weeks following my revelation brought a predictable flood of attention from family members who had previously ignored me. Uncle Richard invited me to lunch at his private club, ostensibly to discuss business opportunities but clearly hoping to somehow regain influence over my decisions. Patricia suddenly discovered a deep interest in my philanthropic work, particularly after learning that my foundation had received several prestigious awards for community impact. My cousin's responses varied widely. Madison seemed genuinely remorseful about her previous attitude and made several attempts to build a real relationship. Connor struggled with the ego blow of learning his poor cousin was wealthier and more successful than him, alternating between grudging respect and defensive hostility. Ashton tried to position himself as a potential business partner, apparently forgetting years of condescending comments about my lifestyle choices. The most dramatic change came from Gabrielle, who had always been the cruelest in her mockery of my circumstances. She approached me at a family gathering 2 months later with what appeared to be genuine humility. "I've been thinking about what you said about wealth not always being visible," she told me. "I realize I've been measuring success all wrong." I appreciated her acknowledgement but maintained appropriate boundaries. Years of dismissive treatment couldn't be erased by a single conversation, no matter how heartfelt it seemed. The restoration of grandfather's estate became my most meaningful project. I hired historians and architects to preserve the original workshop while updating the infrastructure to accommodate modern businesses. The business incubator opened a year later, providing affordable office space and mentorship to technology startups founded by people from backgrounds similar to my parents, hardworking individuals with great ideas but limited access to traditional funding sources. The success of the incubator attracted national attention and several awards for innovative community development. More importantly, it created dozens of jobs and helped launch companies that were making positive impacts in their communities. Uncle Richard was forced to admit that my sentimental decision had generated better returns than his commercial development plan would have achieved. I continued living in my modest apartment and driving my reliable Honda, choices that my family finally understood were deliberate rather than necessary. The freedom of living authentically, without needing to impress anyone or prove my worth through material displays, had become too valuable to abandon. My relationship with money had been shaped by my parents' values and grandfather's example of using wealth as a tool for positive change. The revelation to my family wasn't about seeking their approval or proving my worth. It was about reclaiming a piece of our heritage that they had been willing to sacrifice for short-term profit. 2 years later, I was featured on the cover of a prominent business magazine for my work in sustainable development and affordable housing. The article described me as the Reynolds family's secret weapon and detailed how I'd built a business empire while living under their radar. Uncle Richard framed the magazine cover and hung it in his office, finally proud to claim me as family, but the validation that mattered most came from a different source. At the business incubator's second anniversary celebration, I was approached by a young woman whose technology startup had launched from our facility. My parents were teachers, she told me, tears in her eyes. They always said education was the key to opportunity, but they couldn't afford to help me start my business. This place gave me everything I needed to succeed, standing in grandfather's restored workshop, surrounded by the next generation of entrepreneurs. I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from using privilege responsibly. The money had given me options, but the values my parents instilled had guided how I used those options. My story isn't just about hidden wealth or family vindication. It's about staying true to your principles even when others misunderstand or dismiss you. It's about building something meaningful rather than just building something impressive. And it's about understanding that real success isn't measured by how much you have, but by what you do with what you've been given. The quarterly family meetings continue, but the dynamic has fundamentally changed. I'm no longer the poor relation, sitting at the far end of the table. I'm a full participant in family decisions, with ideas and resources that command respect. More importantly, I've helped shift our family's focus from pure profit maximization to sustainable development and community impact. Some relationships have healed into something authentic and meaningful. Others remain cordial but distant. I've learned that not every family connection can or should be salvaged, and that's perfectly acceptable. The people who matter most are those who value you for who you are, not what you have. Today, I drive past the shopping mall that would have replaced grandfather's estate and feel grateful for the courage to stand up for what mattered. The business incubator is thriving, my real estate portfolio continues to grow, and I sleep well knowing that my wealth is being used to create opportunities for others rather than just accumulating for its own sake. The most unexpected outcome of my revelation has been the family's gradual shift toward more ethical business practices. Seeing the success of my sustainable development projects, Uncle Richard has begun incorporating environmental and social impact considerations into Reynolds Industries' investment decisions. It's not a complete transformation, but it's a start.as. I write this, I'm sitting in the same workshop where my grandfather built his first prototype, now converted into a conference room where young entrepreneurs pitch their ideas to potential investors. The circle feels complete from one generation's innovation to the next, connected by values that transcend mere financial success. My advice to anyone who feels underestimated or dismissed by their family is this: don't let their limited vision define your potential. Build something meaningful, stay true to your values, and let your actions speak louder than their assumptions. Success isn't about proving them wrong, it's about proving yourself right. The real wealth I've accumulated isn't in my property portfolio or business ventures. It's in the freedom to live authentically, the ability to create positive impact, and the knowledge that I've honored the legacy of those who came before me, while building something valuable for those who will come after. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't anger or resentment, it's quiet competence and unwavering integrity. Let them keep their assumptions. You know who you are, and that's enough. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't anger or resentment, it's quiet competence and unwavering integrity. Let them keep their assumptions. You know who you are, and that's enough. 5 years have passed since that transformational family meeting, and the ripple effects continue to surprise me. Last month, I received an unexpected phone call from Connor, who had been struggling with his latest startup failure. Instead of asking for money, he wanted advice on building something sustainable rather than flashy. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me during our coffee meeting, about building wealth versus displaying it. I realize I've been playing the wrong game my entire life. He paused, looking genuinely vulnerable for the first time I could remember. Would you be willing to mentor me? Not financially, but strategically? His request marked a fundamental shift in our relationship. The cousin who had once mocked my slumlord career was now seeking guidance from someone he'd dismissed for years. I agreed to help, with the understanding that real change would require him to examine not just his business approach, but his values. The mentorship has been rewarding in unexpected ways. Connor's first sustainable venture, a platform connecting small businesses with local suppliers, launched 6 months ago and is already profitable. More importantly, he's discovered the satisfaction that comes from creating value rather than just capturing it. Madison's transformation has been even more dramatic. After our reconciliation, she left her superficial PR job and enrolled in a master's program for nonprofit management. She now runs a foundation that provides financial literacy education to high school students from working-class families. At our last family gathering, she told me that working with teenagers who reminded her of my younger self had helped her understand the impact of her previous attitudes. I keep thinking about how we treated you, she said, tears in her eyes. How many other people have I dismissed because they didn't fit my narrow definition of success? Your example forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. Even Uncle Richard has evolved, though his changes came more slowly and pragmatically. The success of my business incubator and sustainable development projects couldn't be ignored, especially when they began outperforming his traditional investments. 2 years ago, he approached me with a proposal to joint venture on a mixed-income housing development that would combine market-rate units with affordable options. Your approach generates better long-term returns, he admitted during our planning meeting. I was so focused on immediate profits that I missed the bigger picture. Sustainable development isn't just ethically superior, it's financially smarter. Our collaboration on the housing project has been surprisingly smooth. Richard's business acumen and connections, combined with my community-focused approach, created something neither of us could have achieved alone. The development won several awards and has become a model for other cities looking to address housing inequality. Patricia's adjustment has been the most superficial, though even she's made some effort to change. She still focuses primarily on appearances and social status, but she no longer makes cutting remarks about my lifestyle choices. At family gatherings, she introduces me with obvious pride as our successful entrepreneur, though I suspect her motivation is more about reflecting well on the family than genuine respect for my accomplishments. Gabrielle's journey has been perhaps the most unexpected. After our conversation about measuring success differently, she took a sabbatical from her marketing career to volunteer with a housing nonprofit. The experience opened her eyes to the real impact that thoughtful development could have on communities. I spent years thinking success meant owning the most expensive things, she told me recently. But volunteering with families who just needed safe, affordable housing showed me what actually matters. I want to find a way to use my skills for something meaningful. She's now transitioning into social impact consulting, helping companies develop authentic community engagement strategies rather than superficial corporate social responsibility programs. The work pays less than her previous career, but she seems genuinely fulfilled in a way I'd never seen before. The business incubator has grown beyond anything I initially imagined. What started as a way to preserve grandfather's workshop has become a nationally recognized model for community-driven economic development. We've expanded to include not just technology startups, but also social enterprises, sustainable manufacturing companies, and creative businesses that might struggle to find traditional funding. The most meaningful success story came last year, when Maria Santos, whose parents had immigrated from El Salvador with nothing but determination, launched a company from our facility that creates job training programs for other immigrant families. Her business now operates in 12 cities and has helped hundreds of people build stable careers. This place doesn't just provide office space, Maria told me at the ribbon cutting for her company's newest location. It provides hope. When you come from a background where nobody expects you to succeed, having someone believe in your potential changes everything. Her words reminded me of my own journey, how my parents' belief in education and hard work had sustained me through years of family dismissal, and how grandfather's example had shown me that wealth could be a tool for positive change rather than just personal gratification. The financial returns from my investments have continued to grow, but money has become less important as a measure of success. My net worth now exceeds $50 million, but I still drive the same Honda and live in the same modest apartment. The freedom to make choices based on values rather than financial necessity has become more valuable than any luxury purchase could ever be. My relationship with money remains grounded in the lessons my parents taught me. Every major financial decision is filtered through questions they would have asked. Does this create value for others? Does it align with our principles? Will it help build a better community? These considerations have guided me toward investments and projects that generate both financial returns and social impact. The quarterly family meetings have evolved into something I actually look forward to attending. Instead of showcasing individual wealth, they've become forums for discussing how our family resources can address community challenges. We recently established the Reynolds Family Impact Fund, which provides patient capital to businesses and organizations working on solutions to housing inequality, educational access, and economic mobility. Uncle Richard chairs the fund's investment committee, but our decisions are made collaboratively, with input from all family members regardless of their individual wealth. It's a structure that would have been impossible 5 years ago, when family governance was based purely on financial contribution rather than shared values and vision. the most profound change has been in how we talk about legacy. Instead of focusing solely on preserving and growing family wealth, our conversations now center on how we can use our privilege responsibly. The younger generation of Reynolds' cousins, children of Madison and Connor who are now teenagers, are growing up with a very different understanding of what it means to be wealthy. Last month, Connor's 16-year-old daughter Ashley chose to volunteer at a homeless shelter for her birthday instead of having the elaborate party that had been family tradition. When asked why, she said, "Cousin,